I have an idea for an engine, and it is something more ridiculous than what you've ever heard before. Allow for the engine to be giant like the two-stroke engine, but smaller, so it could fit into a car, but it would have all the benefits that a two-stroke engine. Conductive nature. So the perfect germination, where what if just from a few seedlings you could grow like Jack and the Beanstalk's crops, where it could be like utilized through how a snow globe is like an hourglass, and a cuckoo clock, you can make it so extravagant as this like steampunk thing, just as information is conserved, but things at like distances are harder to see because they're fuzzier. Just as well, if you have an entire like showcasing of a wax museum, if all the images in it, aren't perfectly set, it's better than just having one really set image. Our experience of having just seeing a whole bunch of ones together that are kind of imitating real life versus just one really real life image of a display in a wax museum. That's why I'm an advocate of laser guided symmetry, because the amount it takes for electricity to be double jumped is fairly equal when it comes to having the exchange of how waves are collapsed. If you were to utilize that with gravity, you could make a double Klein bottle, or just a single Klein bottle, be two Faraday cages that act as Galilean candles. And you don't even need those exactly. The spaceship got to the moon with Newtonian mechanics. So I woke up this morning, and I was underneath of a circuit breaker, and I could hear like humming, and I just realized I've been sleeping right next to a circuit breaker for the last year. And what that does is radiation called EMF. The scientists don't know if having too much radiation leads to stuff not stopping from growing, and what that is called is a mutant. And what a catalyst is, it's a chemical structure that never stops its chemical reaction, and it isn't changed by it either. And so in fairy tale lore, that would be like Jack and the Beanstalk, because the beanstalk kept growing and he had to go up in it and take stuff out of it. So he was a catalyst to the beanstalk's growth because he was utilizing it, but then not being taken out by it as it's being utilized. So you can have Newtonian mechanics into quantum mechanics, where this would be an equal and opposite reaction, and then quantum mechanics would be all these small particles when they're specifically acquired to light. Light being it's a small packet and it can only travel in straight directions. This is important because a building has a center of gravity, and from that is like a giant bubble of lesser and lesser gravity appointed from that position of its center. And so light bends about gravity, making the entire structure of whatever building you're in have a giant cage about it. This is called a Faraday cage, where electricity from within it won't shock the person within it. And if you can make that cage into two different cages, it would be like an hourglass. And the relation between an hourglass is that it can be a Klein bottle, which is a straw going outside of the glass and looping back in. this is like the difference between a snow globe and a cuckoo clock is if you put a cuckoo clock underwater, it would then be encased as like a snow globe. More ridiculous than what you've ever heard before. A spark plug, and it's meant for the ignition to be turned so that the engine can start up. If you were to have that spark plug be utilized as a flicker rate, that would be each of the injections of the fuel going into the engine in tiny packets, like photons, the packets of light, concentrated, heated gas pellets, like paintballs, little things that were shot into it so strong into the fuel injection into the engine that they were interacting with the spark plug and flickering, almost like you were slingshotting them into the engine, would allow for the engine to be giant like the two-stroke engine, but smaller, so it could fit into a car, but it would have all the benefits that a two-stroke engine would. So in the same stanza, if you have a double slit experiment, this is where light is being projected from two slits and making an interaction pattern on the screen. That interaction pattern has like this crystal structure. It's just a pattern with different degrees, and then the more that you can imitate that pattern is just no different than having like two-dimensional things. If the only thing that can override you is two-dimensional like beings, well then all you have to do is make them not part of the two slits and just have the screen be what they're always bound to. And so that would be like a third dimension of their two-dimensionality. The two slits, and have whatever projecting through them being what is projected through two slits and ends up as a pattern on the wall. The characteristics can be one and the same. How Pinocchio would see himself as a wooden figure that was animate. The opposite of animate is inanimate. And if you're a wooden figurine, you're more than likely to be inanimate. But for Pinocchio's sense, he could look at the world as being metal and non-metal, as conductive nature would make things animate. So to him, everything was coming out of the woodwork because he could write everything off as not being him. So looking at coming out of the woodwork wasn't too hard for him. He could just base everything off of being metal or non-metal conductive natures. So the perfect germination, where what if just from a few seedlings you could grow like Jack and the Beanstalk's crops, where it could be like utilized through how a snow globe is like an hourglass, and a cuckoo clock, you can make it so extravagant as this like steampunk thing. And so the interplay of electronics being binary versus a material sense of it having like an encasing or an engraving of a material, the interplay between the two, if you capitalize off both of them, it doesn't matter which one it is. So of atoms, it's really interesting to know the instruction set, because it's no different if you have an engine that is firing on all cylinders and utilizing its spark plug. Could be just the same as a configuration of a computer's motherboard doing all the processing. It's just unable to be extrapolated if you're going with the engine being pulling you versus a motherboard executing a line of binary, the processing power. Just how are you utilizing either of them? Not something to get confused with when there's a horse of a different color.